The silent red telephone in the Situation Room pulsed, a steady, ominous heartbeat against the polished mahogany, signaling not a truce, but a brazen, unprecedented demand for war. The document on the president's desk carried the weight of 1,000 drone payloads, authorizing lethal action against an ally's sovereign soil, and the world held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. If you believe national borders are non-negotiable, hit the like button right now and subscribe to track this escalating crisis. But if you think the drug war justifies any action, no matter how extreme, comment below with #SovereigntyFirst or #ActNow. We need to know where you stand on this red line. The air in the National Palace in Mexico City was thick with a palpable, furious silence, broken only by the sharp, determined voice of President Claudia Sheinbaum, delivering an unequivocal, thunderous rejection to the most powerful nation on earth. Mexico had just stared down a military ultimatum from the United States, an act of defiance that sent shockwaves through the marbled halls of Washington, D.C., instantly freezing the fragile diplomatic ice that had formed over decades of tense relations. This wasn't mere political posturing. This was a line drawn in the ancient, sacred soil of a nation weary of foreign interference, a line that invoked the ghosts of historical grievance and the foundational principle of sovereignty. The demand itself was the brutal culmination of months of escalating rhetoric from Washington, where the administration, fueled by the staggering American overdose death toll, had formally designated major Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. This FTO designation was the legal crowbar, the necessary mechanism that unlocked the prospect of military action and covert operations, moving the fight against fentanyl from a law enforcement problem into a non-international armed conflict. President Trump, seizing this legal justification, had reportedly signed a secret directive to the Pentagon, providing an official basis for direct military operations, explicitly against cartel infrastructure and leadership, wherever they might be found. The urgency in the White House was driven by a single terrifying statistic: the sheer volume of synthetic opioids crossing the border, a silent chemical invasion that defied traditional border controls and conventional countermeasures. For Washington, the perceived moral high ground was unassailable. They were fighting to save American lives from a toxic scourge, convinced that Mexico's internal efforts were insufficient, compromised, or too slow to stem the overwhelming flow of death. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, in carefully worded, nationally televised addresses, had repeatedly alluded to the success of recent maritime strikes against alleged drug-smuggling vessels in international waters, operations that had tragically resulted in casualties but which the administration framed as crucial interdictions, saving millions of lives. These successful, lethal sea operations were the clear, horrifying preview of what the U.S. now intended to replicate on Mexican land: a swift, decisive, and unilateral application of force aimed at eliminating the source of the poison. The atmosphere in the Pentagon was one of readiness, a tense, coiled anticipation for a mission the administration believed was long overdue, viewing the cartels not as criminal syndicates but as combatants in a de facto war. Yet, from Mexico City's perspective, this was not a partnership but an imperial threat, an echo of historical trauma reverberating across centuries. The memory of losing vast territories following the Mexican-American War in the 1840s is not a footnote but a deep national scar that colors every discussion about U.S. military presence. President Sheinbaum, a leader of immense political fortitude and a deep sense of national pride, met the reports of the secret directive and the public demands with cold, measured fury, rejecting the premise that cooperation meant subordination to foreign military control. She articulated Mexico's position with unflinching clarity. While intelligence sharing and security cooperation were welcome, the deployment of foreign troops on Mexican soil was absolutely non-negotiable, a profound violation of their national sovereignty. The president underscored that Mexico is a free, independent, and sovereign country, asserting that it's not going to happen, effectively neutralizing the U.S. threat with the weight of national and international law, backed by a wave of public solidarity across Mexico. The refusal was not just a diplomatic statement, it was a political maneuver designed to appeal to Mexican nationalism and regional solidarity. Strengthening Sheinbaum's hand domestically and internationally against U.S. pressure, she referenced the painful history directly, reminding the public that the last time the United States intervened militarily, Mexico lost half its territory, a powerful rhetorical device that instantly rallied the nation behind her firm stance. This deft handling of the crisis, balancing firmness with diplomatic pragmatism, was crucial to avoid provoking a full-blown economic or military crisis. Even as the rhetoric from the North grew louder and more aggressive, the administration's designation of cartels as FTOs was perceived in Mexico not as a helpful gesture but as a cynical prelude to invasion, an attempt to legally justify the crossing of a border that millions view as sacred. The refusal instantly intensified the already volatile situation along the shared border, transforming a humanitarian crisis into a potential flashpoint for international conflict, raising the specter of direct, armed confrontation. Tensions materialized physically on the ground when mysterious warning signs, declaring an area as restricted U.S. Department of Defense property in English and Spanish. Appeared on Playa Bagdad, a Mexican beach near the mouth of the Rio Grande, an incident that Mexico immediately condemned as an encroachment on national territory. The Mexican Navy was promptly dispatched to remove the signs, confirming the placement was on Mexican soil and requiring the International Boundary and Water Commission to review the exact demarcation, illustrating the hair-trigger sensitivity of the border region. This brazen physical demonstration of unilateral intent, even if officially attributed to contractors, served as a stark, chilling reminder to Mexico of the US's growing impatience and willingness to push the boundaries of national defense jurisdiction, pushing the two nations perilously close to a direct kinetic dispute. The United States administration, for its part, tried to quickly manage the diplomatic fallout from the beach incident, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio stepping in to soften the aggressive military rhetoric, stressing that Washington would not take unilateral action without Mexico's request. Despite the president's personal inclinations, Rubio emphasized that the U.S. was ready to provide comprehensive support, including equipment, advanced training, and unparalleled intelligence sharing, but only if the Mexican government formally requested such assets for operations within its own borders. This strategic retraction was designed to offer a narrow diplomatic off-ramp, a face-saving measure to prevent the immediate collapse of the security cooperation structure that, however strained, remained vital for both nations' long-term interests against organized crime and fentanyl proliferation. The back and forth created a dizzying sense of political whiplash, showcasing the internal divisions within the U.S. administration between those advocating for raw military power and those attempting to preserve essential diplomatic ties with a crucial neighbor and economic partner. The core of the conflict, however, remained rooted in the shifting nature of the drug war itself, now focused on the synthetic terror of fentanyl crisis that allows the U.S. to equate the drug cartels with foreign hostile states, giving rise to the controversial application of the law of armed conflict. This legal interpretation is the administration's most potent, yet most contested, weapon, allowing them to justify lethal strikes without declaring a formal war or seeking explicit congressional approval, treating cartel members as unlawful combatants in a globally recognized non-international armed conflict. Legal scholars and human rights observers have fiercely debated this designation, arguing that drone strikes and the destruction of alleged drug vessels, resulting in dozens of deaths, amount to extrajudicial killings and severe violations of international human rights law, essentially criminalizing the drug trade to the point of justifying lethal military force. The administration's internal legal memos, though confidential, reportedly attempt to satisfy the OLC's two-pronged test, arguing that the strikes serve a national interest and are not of a prolonged scope, but the underlying facts regarding the cartels, CRO, but the underlying facts regarding PAX COCALTS, CORE, but the underlying facts regarding CACs, remaining contentious, and in scoring can king kong can, and cam camped. Can and can't when can and blend and plend but and pan and bat and pan and pan Lincoln and Lincoln the S with Ephraim when Saline was smith Hakala sa silka Chris we were For the cartels themselves, the U.S. designation and the public threat of military strikes serve as both a genuine danger and a powerful propaganda tool, allowing them to portray themselves to local communities not merely as criminals, but as national defenders against a foreign military intrusion. This complex, paradoxical dynamic means that military action, instead of dissolving cartel power structures, could inadvertently strengthen their local support and recruitment efforts, fueling a nationalist narrative against what they would term American imperialism. The cartels are not monolithic. They are decentralized, adaptive organizations with deep roots in local governance, economics, and social life, making a traditional shock-and-awe military strike operation virtually impossible without causing catastrophic civilian casualties and widespread geopolitical destabilization. Their operations extend far beyond drug production into human trafficking, extortion, and fuel theft, creating an economic and social web so complex that surgical military intervention isn't almost entirely of a purely military solution. The international response to the U.S. demands and Mexico's refusal was a tapestry of guarded support and mounting concern, with many Latin American countries silently applauding Mexico's defense of sovereignty while publicly urging diplomatic de-escalation between the two North American giants. Nations like Brazil and Peru, themselves middle powers dealing with increasing U.S. pressure tactics, view Mexico's firm resistance as a necessary bulwark against the unilateral projection of American power in the region, a strategic move that could encourage a collective hedging strategy against Washington's influence. This hedging often involves quietly deepening economic and diplomatic ties with strategic rivals, most notably China, as a method of reducing their economic dependency on the United States, thereby providing greater operating space and immunity from politically motivated sanctions or tariffs. The crisis thus exposed a deeper tectonic shift in hemispheric relations, where the US's hardball primacist approach risks alienating key partners and inadvertently pushing them into alternative alignments, effectively eroding American influence over the long term despite the long term despite the long term, defectively ementively inolant influence effectively intitioning sli, effectively effectimiking kintorin, infecting the piminix to fikenche, and purin king, and kin in pen kin, in kindindle and in incendin, jensen pen kin can and when pens and but with pen will lock and it was and percent boys come off bad as so as go was more great couldn't even what makes it papic and the economic implications of this diplomatic rift are staggering, considering the U.S. and Mexico share one of the world's most critical and deeply intertwined supply chains. Governed by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, any significant military or economic escalation, such as the tariff threats previously leveraged by the Trump administration against Mexican imports, would send shockwaves through the automotive, agricultural, and manufacturing sectors of both countries, causing billions of dollars in losses and potentially plunging the North American economy into significant turmoil. President Sheinbaum has consistently used this economic leverage, reminding Washington that Mexican immigrants and their labor are vital to the U.S. economy, subtly hinting at the mutual destruction that would ensue if the relationship were to fracture completely over a unilateral military action. The refusal to yield on sovereignty, therefore, is also a calculated economic risk, betting that the United States cannot afford to fully destabilize a key trading partner, forcing the American administration to eventually revert to diplomatic channels and intelligence cooperation, instead of kinetic strikes. The tension has also inadvertently strengthened the internal cohesion of Mexico's security apparatus, forcing the government to double down on its own strategies and demonstrate its capacity to handle the cartel threat independently, a necessary show of force to both its people and the demanding neighbor to the north. Sheinbaum has made it clear that while intelligence from the U.S. is welcomed, the operations will be carried out by Mexican forces, highlighting the dedication of the Mexican military and the National Guard in the ongoing, often brutal, fight against organized crime within their borders. This renewed aggressive posture in combating the cartels, partly a direct consequence of Trump's earlier tariff threats, signals a notable shift in Mexico's security strategy, demonstrating that internal pressure can achieve results where external coercion only generates diplomatic conflict. The current reality is a precarious balance. Mexico must aggressively combat the cartels to protect its own people and its reputation, while simultaneously drawing a resolute and unyielding line against any foreign military incursion, a high-stakes tightrope walk with profound global consequences. The future of North American security hinges precariously on this standoff, with the central question being whether the United States can reconcile its domestic crisis, the fentanyl epidemic, with its commitment to international law and the sovereignty of its closest trading partner. Recognizing that unilateral force could shatter the foundational trust of the entire continent, the U.S. military buildup in the region, including the stationing of jets and the deployment of powerful naval assets like the USS Gerald Ford to the Caribbean, remains a significant source of intimidation and a constant reminder of the potential for sudden, devastating strikes, maintaining a state of high alert and diplomatic anxiety in Mexico City. For now, Mexico's firm, unwavering refusal has successfully deflected the immediate threat of land invasion, forcing the White House to recalibrate its strategy and tone down the most aggressive rhetoric, leaning back toward intelligence, sharing in cord and word and counting planing back toward, leaning back to work, in back toward in back, to work and parrot, in bow kinit, said and being selling past in court, and san quan quen kin and tin sen pen, and bin bun and pen and plen ponkin in, for and callan pup, then win, and for poor is sen, pesenis and penselin. But would it be so ask also assess as o as a bass SF in so go but van This moment of crisis has clearly defined the new geopolitical landscape. The era of unquestioned U.S. hegemony in North America is rapidly evolving, and nations like Mexico are asserting their independence with conviction, demanding respect for their territory and their dignity in the face of immense pressure. The world watches closely to see if this diplomatic victory for Mexican sovereignty can be sustained against the relentless, underlying currents of the American drug crisis and the aggressive, unpredictable nature of U.S. foreign policy demands.